I want to welcome you to the most remarkable journey you will ever take. We have long wondered about the mysteries behind the resurrection of the dead, or the transformation of human to divine. We have asked ourselves these questions. Why am I human? Where are we going as a human race? Why did God create us? In these next 26 weeks, we're going to learn the answers to these questions. We're also going to learn about the powers that lie within us, that creativity that enables us to prophesy, to heal, and to discern. Our sailing vessel that will take us from earth to the heavens is known and called the Nautilus. If you remember, the sea creature is one which always closes and seals off its chambers as it outgrows it and builds a new one. And we must do the same thing, for we must cease being what we are in order to become something different. And like the Nautilus, we must leave behind our old ideas and concepts. So please join me on this very wondrous journey. I'm your hostess, Elizabeth MacDonald Burrows. Welcome to another journey aboard the Nautilus as we climb aboard the sailing ship which takes us from earth to heaven. We talked last week about the very beginning of the evolution of the human world. We left behind our solar system because we studied for a few moments or for a brief time the birth of the sun and how the sun gives birth to a solar system, and how if we can understand our own solar system, we will understand the nature of every solar system, because the laws of nature are immutable. And that may sound like a strange statement in a way, and I am certain that there are many scientific people who would disagree with me. However, the divine plan of God is but a single plan. It moves forward in a predetermined pattern to follow the plan which He created within Himself, which started our universe. And since it is but one law that flows through all planets, all solar systems, and all galaxies, we have to say the laws of nature, or that which we can see, are therefore immutable and unchanging. So when we can understand the nature of our own solar system, we'll understand the nature of all solar systems. When we can understand how where did we come from, these questions in the evolution of the human world. Where did I come from? Why am I different than others? And what is my purpose in life? And what happens when I die? So as we answer these questions pertaining to ourself and our own progression, we will also understand the progression of life forms upon every planet that is in this vast universe of the stars. So as we begin this time on our journey, we're going to begin, of course, where we left off last week. And we will remove our beautiful solar system against a blue sky of many stars and put it away as we go to the chart that we were looking at last week. If you remember, we had just begun to talk about plant life as it existed 400 million years ago, before there was ever any life upon the earth. And certainly human form did not come along until long after animal life. And as we looked at animal life, we were looking at things over here that was pretty much the nature of 375 million years ago, 275 million years ago, which is about 100 million after some of our plant life, and 375 million, 250 million years ago. And look at this creature, which looked very much like plants. This creature here is 400 million years old. And we say, what does this have to do with us? It has a great deal to do with us, because our potentiality, yours and mine, existed in the very format or prototype of our earth. And so this means that all of us collectively, unknowing to ourselves, have worked through every cycle of progression that has brought us to the sixth epoch and our entry into the seventh and final epoch of Earth's progression. So we have passed through this. I usually take great offense when someone says, well, we descended from apes, or we might say we ascended from apes and orangutans and things like that. Ascended. Descended is not quite the right term for this. But we have passed through every stage of progression. Collectively, we have worked together to build this planet through our collective consciousness. And it's interesting, isn't it, that as we pass through the more primitive forms of shaping this planet, we were able to work together in one unified force that brought forth all life. And now that we have developed our individualized existence, we fight one another. And I've been working on an autobiography, and I wrote some lines, a couple of lines here recently that I think everyone should hear. And I was talking about this, the necessity for us to learn to work together as a world family. And I said, you know, it seems that we are brave enough to fight a war, but we are not brave enough to bring peace. We are powerful enough to love one another, but we are not powerful enough to overcome our hate. That is interesting, isn't it, that we have such a powerful force to love and to build and to create and to war and to fight. And yet we kept seeming to harness this power to use it for the good of mankind. But we will one day, as we mature and as we grow, through our suffering, through our trials, through the tribulations that come to us in life, we will learn. And one day we will be able to work independently as an individualized consciousness together with the collective. So we're looking at 400 billion years ago. And as we look up here to the upper part of the chart, we finally see some of the creatures that kind of remind us of the brontosaurus or the dinosaurs. And we're looking at, this here was, of course, this particular creature was 100,000 pounds, and he existed over about 140 billion years ago, and he also was 90 feet long. And that's probably why they don't exist today. They would have eaten everything in sight and been too large for the progression of the planet. As we look at here, we're looking at 130 million years ago, and these creatures here 180 million years ago. We get down here to this creature 67 million years ago and 67. I'm going to take it back. This is probably 80 million years ago rather than 180 million. And we've got here to 67 million years ago. And we see here, as we move on to the chart, and look at what time life has done in this progression, we kind of come down to here, the two creatures that probably look the most like man. One of the mistakes that we keep making in the world of science and in the world of religion is, once again, we want to separate creationism from evolutionism, and we can't do that. Neither will understand the nature of the human race as long as we separate these two. We're going to have to bring them back together, and they must work in harmony. As we mentioned in the first episode, creationism is that of going from inward to outward, and that of evolution is from outward to inward. So this means that as we study the outside form, it is merely a reflection of that which is inside. And it is this inside which carries the light, which can send forth through the soul the consciousness to draw to it the substance necessary to create whatever form will allow it to manifest for its current degree of progression. So this means that human life did not come from, of necessity, of orangutan and ape. We have wanted to believe that, or to take it into consideration, because it is the most human-like animal that walks upon the earth. But we sprung forth from many forms of life. When it was time for human life to come upon earth, there was a sudden surge all over the earth for human life to come forth. And so it passed through. We're not going to say it ever came from, because we don't come from anything. We pass through these collective forms. Forms that will express, we learn, and then we outgrow it. And we're going to look at that today, and I mentioned it last week, that it is group soul progression and evolution is the most intricate and difficult thing for me to explain so that everyone can understand it. But we'll be going into that today and take a look how we, as a group collectively, can move on and progress through group soul evolution until we reach the individualized existence of the human race. And even then, we have to say we may have forms of group souls, in that we have Japanese and Chinese, and we have black and we have white, and each one of these represent continents, represent different nations, and there's always, in the complexity or makeup of that nation, in the consciousness, and shall I say, yes, the word I'm looking for is personalities, they differ in each country and each continent. So as we begin to look at the human race, we're going to have to go back here, finally 14 million years ago. Now that's a long time, from 400 million years ago, when we had this vegetation and we had fish and fowl, and we began then over 80 million years ago to bring forth creatures like the brontosaurus and our kind of upright form there at the end. There's a long time. If we take this form right here, which was 67 million years ago, and we compare it to our first known human 14 million years, what happened to that? Over 50 million years it took to progress from the animalistic instinctive nature or progression into a human life form. And we can't even consider this form here to be absolutely and totally human. It's very hair-like. It's you can tell that its degree of intellect is not very high because of the very small cranial area. One thing that our Creator has done is to always make it possible for us to have a brain that is larger than what we will use. In other words, even now in modern time, they say we only use a small percentage of the entirety of our brain, although the brain serves many functions throughout the body. And naturally, how would we store information? How would we be able to grasp, rather, information that is beyond our understanding if we did not have a brain that would work for us to absorb something that is larger than what we are today? Meaning that what we know tomorrow will be more than what we know today. So we have been endowed with a brain that enables us to go beyond the boundaries of what we are today and to learn more. And so we move here from about 14 million years ago to this creature here. And this is, imagine, 14 million years ago. This one here is 5.5 million years ago. Almost 10 million years pass to progress through human progression from this stage to this stage. Almost 10 million years. This tells us that progression is infinitely slow. Why? Because we had no reasoning power. We had no ability at that time to be able to think or to know what fire is. We were still functioning under almost a basic instinctive animal nature. And so our progression is very slow. Science has told us this came at 3.7 million years ago, and that it just simply did not continue to materialize. In other words, it became extinct. And we don't think of our human races becoming extinct. But think of how it has melded together, and the Eskimo race has begun to diminish. We look at the not only the Eskimo, but the Indian race as also began to diminish. And we have watched pygmies, the African pygmies and things like this beginning to diminish because of the encroachment of civilization. So we have had human races that have become extinct. We have human races that ultimately will become extinct. But that does not mean that the soul in it becomes extinct. In fact, the whole human race will be extinct in the world of tomorrow, because how else can we become angels as long as we are remaining human? And it is in the prototype that God has built us to go from human to divine. So one day the entire human race of earth will also be extinct. And we need not cry over that, because we'll simply be something more and something greater. And that is the way it has always been. We progress from one stage to the next. And then we move over here to about 2 million years ago. So I kind of skip this one in between and go from 5.5 million years ago to about 2 million years ago. And if I'm not mistaken, this is my Africanus. No, this is the Australopithecus robustus. This must be the Africanus Australopithecus, the one which I work so hard to learn to say. We are progressing as our reasoning power, and as we experience and are exposed to human life with the challenges to overcome, you can see that our progression is becoming somewhat more rapid. And as we move here, we're at 1.3 million years ago. So it only took us a couple million years to progress from here to here. And then we go here to the Neanderthal man, which was 100,000 years ago. So in less than about 1 million years, we went from here to Neanderthal. And then Homo sapien, surprise, from 100,000 years ago of the Neanderthal man, we at last 40,000 years ago came into Homo sapien. So that means that it only took about 60,000 years to go from Neanderthal to Homo sapien. And if we look at Homo sapien, or Homo sapien, as it was 40,000 years ago, and we look at the head here, which is so flat, still does not have a large brain capacity to the more rounded oval of today's time, you will understand why science has decided that we are no longer Homo sapien. And as I mentioned in one of the earlier shows, science has given us a name, but it is so complex, and I've only heard it once, and I haven't yet memorized it. So you scientists who are out there might want to try to do a little investigation and see if you can get that name for me, or at least for yourself. So this shows us the progression as life has been for over 400 million years. So we have not progressed very rapidly. We only learned to read and write as a mass consciousness the last 100 years. And still there are not only cultures, but many, many people who are yet illiterate. So we have not yet developed enough to overcome war, to be strong enough to bring peace, because we have spent, over 10 million years fighting. It is in every aspect of our genetics to war, to be angry, to hate, because this is what we've done. Before we consider ourselves to be creatures that are so bad, we have to remember that we're overcoming over 400 million years of war. We have the instinctive nature to survive is the primordial law that flows through our 50 billion galaxies. And I believe that I said in another show that we had 150 billion galaxies, but in watching one of the astronomy series here the other night, I think they mentioned 50 billion galaxies. So we'll just lessen that 100 million and go there to 50 billion galaxies, which is enough for me. But anyway, this primordial law that flows through this instinctive nature is one of survival. And we have, when we think of hatred and jealousy and anger, all of these are stems off of that primordial law. When a herd, two different herds come together, often the males will fight for supremacy over the females. As we come into human life and someone decides to take the one that we love away from us, or they flirt with it, we may get very angry inside because we have jealousy. But that jealousy stems from, this is my territory, this is my property, and you leave well enough alone. We have fought this now over 14 million years of human progression. We can't expect to throw away the very tools that helped us to grow, to learn, that are constantly in front of us so that we overcome. We can't throw those away overnight. We just don't suddenly go from human to divine without going through a complete transformation. A transformation that would be as complete as an animal going into human. A complete transformational change. And this is where we're going to go next, is to the blackboard and look at those 7 epochs one more time and try to observe this through group soul progression. So I'll remove this chart here and kind of turn toward the board, if I might. And if you remember, we looked at these 7 epochs here, and I had drawn 7 different circles. And this was actually to represent the light or creation or the prototype of our particular world. Not the prototype of our solar system as the sun contains within it, but the prototype as it is in Earth. So that when Earth actually was born of the sun, it was pure light. And for those that think that Hades is deep in the interior of Earth, fiery furnaces, well, you're not too far wrong, because the center and core of our Earth is indeed a molten mass of gases and ethers, which is still from some distant star, and certainly a part of the sun from which we were born. And as it gathered together or experienced exposure in the cold outer atmosphere, it drew together and created for itself a suit of clothes. But contained within that is the entire prototype of 7 periods, our 7 epochs of progression. And so we talked about the fact that the first one represented light, from darkness into light. And then from light, we journeyed into the world of matter, because light gathered together the substance to create a suit of clothes. We might think in terms of it from scientific point, I suppose, as a hardening, because this hot molten mass coming against the cold outer atmosphere brought the rains which cool the earth. But our earth is a living thing. And I don't say that the earth has a brain by which it can go out there and weave itself on a loom some suit of clothes. But it is intelligent life form which gathers whatever substance through automatic instinct necessary for survival. And it was up to Earth to bring forth the 7 epochs that are created within it. So from light we went to the world of matter as the Earth's surface cooled and developed this crust which turned it actually into a planet. And then from matter we began to develop what we would classify as vegetation. the trees that we looked at 50 million years ago, the plant life that existed during those periods of time. So 500 million years ago, 340 million years. So vegetation. And then, so we went from day one, first day of creation, light. Second day of creation, world of matter. Third day of creation, or the third epoch, to the world of vegetation. And then from the world of vegetation, this is a repeat of what we've learned before. From the world of vegetation, we brought together fish and fowl. They did not come simultaneously, but they fit within that same realm, because you see, as fish or marine life sought to the light of the sun, some began to crawl upon the lands and soon began to develop bodies that would enable it to survive on land. And we'll look at that when we get to our group soul progression. And from fish and fowl, we went to the world of animal. The fifth day, animal. Vegetation, fish and fowl, animal. And from animal, and that's a very crooked circle, from the world of animal, we then went to the world of humans. And that is where we got the 666 from, the sign of the beast, meaning the spirit, the soul, and all incarnate into that sixth epoch of creation, meaning we were human. We don't like to consider ourselves as a beast, as a human being, but we have risen kind of from the beast-like nature and still have within us this lower nature that has hatred and anger and war and so on. And the higher angelic nature, which wants peace and love and harmony and victory over matter. So then from animal we went on to man in the sixth epoch of creation. It's interesting, isn't it, when we do this from Roman numerals, we can also almost say that it tells the story of creation, because one divided into two, the light became the world of matter, which meant it took upon itself a denser form, so it had a lower form and a higher form, that which is light and that which is matter. And then matter had to put upon itself, in its descent, it had to put upon itself a suit of clothes, and from vegetation, and as it continued its ascent, it brought forth life and animal and human, and there's no way for human except upward. We must therefore go from the sixth phase of creation, of progression and evolution, to the seventh and final epoch of creation. And as we have mentioned, this will change man from human to divine. And that within a few thousand years now, not millions of years any longer, but a few thousand years, we will have accomplished this great task. We now have the brain capacity and the ability to read and to write. We have the knowledge in the libraries, world knowledge at our fingertips. We can no longer sit in the complacency of believing for one moment that this earth took 7 days out of the week. And I believe we explained that when we said that in the old days, it was commonly thought by the church, and when I speak of the Church of Rome, that the earth was the center of the universe. Because as we sat here upon earth, it seemed as though the entire universe moved around us. Copernicus and Galileo, of course, this was sad for them, because they began to realize that our earth, and believe that our earth was rotating around the sun. This was heresy at those times. And when we believe in 7 weekdays that God built in one 7-day period, as we understand a week in today's world, we're right back there in the Christianity that believed that Earth was the center of the universe. Because if you look at fundamental concepts of antiquity in the world of Christianity, here out of this 50 billion galaxies, which houses hundreds, millions of solar systems, out of this one single little planet, which is actually in a solar system in the outer fringes, our little planet, and the outer fringes of the Milky Way. God picked it and put his only Son upon this one single planet. Then we would, yes, believe that possibly our Earth came in 7 weekdays. But science and astronomy has proven beyond all doubt through the natural processes of dating and all of these different forms and techniques now that we have by modern technician have proven that we are millions of years old. So we cannot go on that assumption any longer. We know now we are not the center of the universe, and yet we are. I don't care what planet we was on, whether we were in outer space, far away, or on this one, we would find that the universe kind of evolves around us. So wherever we go, wherever we are, I guess we can say we're the center of the universe, but at the same time, we're not. We're part of an expanding universe, a part of a universal family. And so as we move in, we're reached that particular period now in human progress where we're ready to step beyond the boundaries of those belief systems of the past and to step through a new doorway of exploration. I suppose we thought that our exploration would take us to planetary systems that are beyond our own solar system. And in time, that is true. We will certainly travel to the, I'm not going to say to the far reaches of the universe, but we will certainly travel beyond the boundaries of our known solar system. And we have ahead of us technology that we have barely yet conceived. But it is coming, and it's here to stay. And that's where we have to turn our eyes is toward heaven. But we also can graduate from human to divine. We can, through our unity with the spiritual force that flows through the universe, we can protect ourselves from further embodiment into human progression. And that's what we're standing at the doorway right now, is the doorway between human and divine. The doorway in which we step from Homo sapien into something that is so totally new and different. Thousands of years rest ahead of us yet before we'll bring this planet to peace. But we can go on an hypothesis that we will still be here thousands of years from now, and that the end of the world shall not come until man has brought it to peace. I think I was doing a show one time and someone asked me how I could be so sure of it. And I said, because we are progressing and everything that is in the laws of nature prove to us that we are changing every day. And if we are changing then every day, and we have come from over 400 million years ago through this more primitive vegetation into the world of man, then we can assure that somewhere in our future there must be another step for us to take, and yet another one. Did you ever wonder what might exist beyond angelic? Well, I suppose it would be archangelic. And from archangelic, what about the term Godhead? That term in which we will go into as our 26 weeks progresses, to help you to understand how the various realms that exist beyond this world which is visible to the human eye. But for now we're going to look at human group soul evolution, which is so infinitely difficult. So I will be erasing the board so that we can look at this. And I like to draw our planet just simply a round circle. And on this round circle, and I'll draw it at least big enough, And I just remembered that we probably, I think I can explain that in a different way, so be patient here with me. We will draw mountains and trees and, of course, oceans. And the only tree I've ever been able to draw is a semblance of a palm tree. So we must be in a tropical island when we're there. The Earth poles, North Pole, palm tree's pretty close to the North Pole to exist, but we'll pretend it's out here in the Pacific somewhere. And so we have mountains, we have trees, we have flowers, we have grass. Now, group soul is difficult to understand to some degree because it is a constant division of what already exists. So let us begin with a single cell. It is said that when life began upon earth, that it began with a single cell which did not even exist long enough sometimes to reproduce. The potentiality in that cell was both male and female. And we have also mentioned that the soul is neither male nor female. It doesn't make any difference what body it wears. It's the fact the soul itself is neither one. So we're going to take a single cell up here, and we're going to divide it. And as we divide it, we have two cells. And as we divide those, we have 4 cells. Now, as 4 cells came into existence, let us just suppose that 2 of these got caught in the currents, in the ocean, in the sea or something, in the waters that came down, and found themselves over here on the South Pole. And let's say these 2 remained up here. Let's say this all started up here in the tropics somewhere. So let's say the rest, these 2 now, remain in the tropics. Well, something's happened here, you see. We have 2 souls, we have 2 cells which have experienced the tropics. We now have 2 cells which have experienced and sought to survive in the cold North Pole, or South Pole. Now, these cells that are here must find a means of survival. So this means they're going to build for themselves, or ultimately through continual progress, they're going to have a different form, or be of somewhat different substance in order to survive the frozen north. So they will gather the frozen south, and they will gather together the substance that will create the bodies necessary to do this. So any cells now, as they divide, we begin to have a new breed of cell beginning here at the South Pole that's going to be completely different as these divide and remain in the tropics. Well, a couple of these got swung over here to the North Pole, and these will have different experiences than those of the South Pole, and at the same time they can no longer survive in the tropics because they have left it. They must now find a means of survival here. So as they do this, and this kind of goes with Darwin, because natural selection means they will reach out to draw to them whatever will help their survival. So I'm going to erase our single cells now, and believe me, this is not intended to represent the actuality of evolution. What we're doing here is trying to help you to understand how it was possible for us to pass through, because we are a part of this earth. We were a part of the potentiality of the prototype before it ever came into existence. That meant you and I have flowed through every cycle of progression, using a variety, expressing through. Because in this single cell is the potentiality of human life. Collectively, this group soul must one day come into human life existence. This means that, well, I'll stop there for a moment and we'll look at that in just a moment. So I'm just using now something that symbolizes and represents. Let us just say that in order to survive, they had to develop some legs so they could jump. So here they became frogs. So this doesn't mean that there is not still single cell form, but now there is a new means of progression. Those which were in other areas that had to build a different form became something else, more than what a single cell is. So they became, let us say, frogs. Now, the frog family is of all one group soul. But those frogs that might have to exist in the tropics is going to be different than those frogs that's going to have to exist in Seattle, Washington, or on the East Coast. They're going to be different. So as they have different experiences, their form's going to change. So the frogs will not be exactly alike in the East or the West. There will be some difference between them. And so finally the frogs keep, let us say from frogs, they began to develop forms of animal forms, moving in from fish and fowl. Now some of these cells became whales and dolphins, and some of the cells grew into moray eels. Others grew on land in forms of spiders and snakes and frogs and all kinds of things. Some began to exist upon land, some began to exist in the water. And each will build a form. That light in it will create a form which will enable it to survive in whatever condition it finds itself in. So animal life, we can say from fish and fowl, gradually parts of it began to, some motivating factor within it began to move it out toward land, began to develop legs, and from legs came forth ultimately different forms of animals, many different forms of animals as the millions of years began to progress. And even so, even as animal, we still had group soul progression. How can we recognize a group soul? A group soul is orangutans. All the orangutans that exist upon Earth today is a group soul. All of the dogs are a group soul, but that one group soul is divided into many aspects like the cell, because in this group soul of dogs, we have Saint Bernard, and we have little Chihuahuas, and we have Scotties, and a variety of different dogs that are going to fit within the parameters or the group soul of a dog. And depending on the experiences of those animals will depend upon what kind of form or what kind of animal and soul, how would I put it? I think I would like to say that it puts all of the German Shepherds into one group soul, but those that are raised and domesticated cannot belong, will ultimately separate themselves from the group soul of the German Shepherd. Those German Shepherds, which were left to the wilds, will remain wild animals. So wolves are, of course, one group soul. Coyotes are one group soul. Cats are one group soul, but again, like the dogs, the cats are broken into many subgroups. Within the group soul of cats are many different species of cats. Domesticated ones will grow much more rapidly than what the undomesticated. So whenever we take any form of life, whether, and I'm not talking about killing it, but when we take the responsibility of it, when we go to buy a plant, we have accepted a part of a group soul. The rhododendron, one group soul, but some of the flowers are pink and some are red, and that separates them into groups within the one group. So we are a world family. It still has not changed. You, I, we are a world family. And within our world family are also groups, as we talked about before. There's still African pygmy, Eskimo, Chinese, Japanese, black, white. And yet we're still all one single group soul, and just divided into many different species. and races. So now we come to this part of human life. How do we progress? And we mentioned this in the earlier show, that one of the most difficult things for the Christian world to accept is the idea or concept that we re-enter embodiment. But by no other means is there a fair and equitable way of distributorship in which all people have equal rights, in which all people were created equal, and which all people will ultimately be great. There is no other way except climbing the ladder of re-entry into embodiment. As long as we throw that idea and that concept away, we do not have any explanation as to why God, who is not a deity, but God who is 50 billion galaxies, God who is the ever-expanding universe, because this ever-expanding universe is the suit of clothes he wears. And how could we have a God that would put one on the streets and make them poor, make another a concert pianist at the age of 12? I have a friend who began to play the piano at the age of 3. A friend who, the same friend who was playing concert at the age of 12 without ever having had a piano lesson. Why? Do we have a God up there that looks down and says, oh, that looks like a nice little boy, so I guess I'll just make him a protege? Or look down and say, that's a nice little girl, so we'll make her this or we'll make her that. We don't have that kind of a God. We have a God that created us all equal. He implanted in every one of us, whether we are a pygmy, whether we are whatever race or creed or color, doesn't make any difference. He implanted in us himself. And in that he lives in all of us. That means that each of us have an equal seed of greatness. And that someday in our right time, we will portray that seed of greatness. So I can promise faithfully, everyone out there, someday, sometime, someplace will be a Socrates, a Plato, an Einstein, a Jacques Cousteau, a Jesus, a Buddha, a Beethoven, a Leonardo da Vinci. Out there, every one of you have a part of the divine plan, a part of that perfection. Until each of you have found that perfection and manifested it upon earth, we're all bound by this, meaning we can't move on because we will not yet have built a perfect earth. Yes, we can move on from human to divine, but what do you think angels do? I know that whenever I am in dire straits and I have great problems, I pray and I am sent angelic help, and so are you. And we all feel that we are protected and guided by angels and that we have guardian angels. Then that must mean the angelic kingdom is very busy, because we as a human race manage to get into a lot of trouble. And we keep doing things wrong. We just don't always do them right. And so we really keep the angelic kingdom busy. And the angelic, when we move from human to divine, will be a part of that angelic kingdom that will have to help the rest of our brothers and sisters here upon earth until they too can have their moment of greatness upon the winds of time. I like looking at every individual and knowing that there's greatness in them, and that someday, somewhere, someplace, sometime, they will manifest that greatness. And I have also been blessed with the foresight and vision that God always shows me the destiny of that person, so that when I run into a young girl here who's 16 years old, and she's been in jail a couple times, and she's on drugs, and her life is really a mess. There doesn't appear to be any hope for her, so we classify her, or label her a juvenile delinquent. And I'm speaking about a girl I've met several times, a young girl. And yet, one day, she will be a concert pianist. And how wonderful it is for me to be able to tell her mother, yes, she is having a lot of difficulty now and a lot of trouble, but one day, sometime, she will become a concert pianist. And I saw the beauty of this girl as she will be, not in this lifetime, but someday, sometime. And so I like the idea that everyone has a seed of greatness. And I consider it a great privilege to be able to see ahead far enough to see what that person will be. So we say to ourselves, well, I can't be great because I'm 80 years old or 82 years old or 70 years old or 60 years old, and how am I going to have an opportunity to be great? But you will. That's what embodiment is all about. Embodiment is not our punishment. Embodiment is the tool of God that He has given to us to climb this ladder that through having a body we learn. And since the light is always in us, He always incarnates us into the unlearned lessons. So for whatever comfort it is, I want you to know that the worst of you is here upon this earth. And so we put upon ourselves, I think I like this little story. I put upon myself a suit of clothes, and I went forth, and I saw Satan. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and we began to war. And I lost. And I'm glad. And I put upon myself another suit of clothes, and I went forth, and I looked at Satan, and he looked at me, and we fought. And I lost. And I'm glad. And I put upon myself another suit of clothes, and this time I'm very strong, and I go forth, and I see Satan, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and the battle was long and hard. And I lost, and I'm glad. And then I discovered I was of light, and I brought forth that light in me, and I went forth. I put upon myself a body, a suit of light, and I went forth, and I saw Satan, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we began to battle. But it was brief because we merged and ascended. Because that which represents the Satan in us is our own lower, mortal, corporeal nature, that part of us which has the unlearned lessons. So this light takes us, puts us into a body, we wear it out, we put upon ourselves another one, we wear it out, and each time it brings with it lessons to be learned. So we began to overcome the hardships or the trials of life. And one day we discover the light in ourselves, and through meditation and contemplation and understanding, we began to bring forth that light of God that dwells in us. And as we do so, we began to change in this small and finite mind that knew only of itself in this limited form. Suddenly, starts to become something else. It becomes omnilateral, capable of so many things, and doing so many things better than it ever had. So be with me next week as we talk a little bit more about this journey that we make as we re-enter embodiment and how it builds our personalities. Thank you for being with me.